This is a true story. November 25th, 1977. Deer Lodge Hospital, Winnipeg, Manitoba. A man lies dying at age 62, his body worn from 2 wars, chronic arthritis, and years of alcoholism that became the only escape from memories that never stopped hunting him. His last address is a Salvation Army shelter, and there is no family at his bedside, no recognition on the hospital forms of what he accomplished, just another Indigenous man dying in poverty in a country that forgot him decades before his heart stopped beating. His name is Tommy Prince, Sergeant in the Devil's Brigade, Canada's most decorated Indigenous soldier with 11 medals earned across 2 wars, including the Military Medal and the Silver Star, one of only 3 Canadians in history to receive both decorations. The Germans called him Geist, Ghost, and Teufel, Devil, because they feared him more than artillery, more than tanks, more than entire battalions. He was one man moving through their lines like smoke, stealing boots while they slept, eliminating sentries without sound, a shadow that killed without warning. He saved hundreds of Allied lives, led assaults that captured thousands of enemy soldiers, and performed missions that commanders called impossible. He was the most decorated member of the most elite commando unit in the war, a warrior whose courage earned recognition from 5 nations. Canada's response when he came home was systematic and cruel. You cannot vote. Your veteran benefits are less than white soldiers receive. Your cleaning business will fail because no one will hire an Indian. Your advocacy for Indigenous rights will be ignored, and your medals are worthless when you need to eat. So he sold them, one by one, to survive. This is the story of what one man did for a country that forgot him before he was buried. October 25th, 1915. A canvas tent in Petersfield, Manitoba. Thomas George Prince enters the world as one of 11 children born to Henry and Arabella, Prince of the Broken Head Band of Ojibwe. He is descended from Chief Peguis, the Saulteaux chief who led 200 Ojibwe from Sault Ste. Marie to Manitoba's Red River in the 1790s, who signed the Selkirk Treaty with the Crown, who negotiated for his people when negotiation still seemed possible. Tommy learns to track before he learns to read, his father teaching him the bush in the way fathers have taught sons for thousands of years, showing him how to move without sound, how to read signs in broken twigs and disturbed earth, how to hunt, how to survive in wilderness that breaks unprepared men. By age 10, Tommy can track a deer for miles without losing the trail, can shoot a rifle with precision most adults never achieve, possesses skills that seem useless in 1930s Manitoba for an Indigenous man facing systematic discrimination at every turn. Age 5, the government takes him. Elkhorn Indian Residential School, 400 kilometers from home, from family, from everything he knows. They try to erase his language, his culture, his identity, standard practice, government policy, the mandate to break the Indian and save the child. Tommy survives it, completes grade 8, returns to the reserve changed but unbroken, carrying scars that will never fully heal, but refusing to let them define him. He works lumber camps and manual labor, whatever pays, though the bush calls him back constantly. He hunts, he tracks, he becomes extraordinary at both, a superb marksman and an excellent tracker, with skills that seem worthless in a world that does not value Indigenous excellence. September 1939. War begins in Europe, and Tommy tries to enlist. The Canadian Army rejects him. He tries again, and they reject him again. Then again. The reason goes unspoken, but understood. He is Indigenous, and the Army does not want Indians. Not yet. Not until desperation outweighs prejudice. June 3rd, 1940. France has fallen. Britain stands alone, and Canada needs more soldiers suddenly and desperately. Tommy applies again, and this time they accept him. He is 24 years old. As soon as I put on my uniform, he will say later, I felt like a better man. A statement that reveals both pride and pain. The relief of being valued and the tragedy of needing a uniform to feel that value. He joins the Royal Canadian Engineers, trains as a sapper, spends months on construction work, building huts and roads and defence works in England. Important work, but not what he wants. Tommy did not join the army to build huts. He joined to fight, to prove something, to show his people were as good as any white man. October 1941. The army calls for volunteers for a parachute unit, dangerous and elite, with a high washout rate. Tommy volunteers immediately, completes his training in England, returns to Canada, and by December 1942 he is promoted to sergeant. Then something else comes, something secret and unnamed, and Tommy volunteers for that too, without knowing what it is or where it will take him. The 1st Canadian Special Service Battalion is confidential, its purpose unknown, and Tommy is sent to Fort Benning in Georgia, then to Helena, Montana, transported on trains with blacked-out windows so no one knows where they are going. The Americans and Canadians are forming something new. The 1st Special Service Force, 1,800 men, half American and half Canadian, elite commandos who will later be called the Devil's Brigade. The training is unlike anything Tommy has seen. Stealth tactics, hand-to-hand combat, explosives, rock climbing, mountain warfare, parachute assault, training on every Allied weapon and every captured German weapon, ski troops, amphibious assault, everything designed to create soldiers who can do anything, anywhere. Tommy excels because his childhood skills translate perfectly to this new warfare. The tracking, the silent movement through wilderness, the marksmanship. Everything his father taught him in the Manitoba bush becomes lethal in the hands of the Devil's Brigade. He becomes a reconnaissance sergeant, a scout. His job to move ahead of the force, locate enemy positions, and report back without being detected. Which is to say, his job is to be a ghost. If you're discovering these forgotten Canadian stories for the first time, consider subscribing. There are dozens more that deserve to be told, and every week we bring another one back from the silence Canada seems determined to maintain. November 19, 1943. The 1st Special Service Force lands in Naples, Italy, and their first real mission is to break the Bernhard Line, the Winter Line, the German defensive positions blocking the Allied advance on Rome. The mountains are fortified with machine gun nests and artillery, and the Allies have tried 3 times to take Monte la Difensa, failing each time with massive casualties. The position is considered impregnable. December 3rd through 9, 1943. The Devil's Brigade attacks Monte la Difensa by climbing the steepest cliff face at night, approaching from terrain the German defenders consider impossible for an assault. The force reaches the summit before the Germans understand what is happening, opens fire, and destroys everything they find. The battle costs them 77% casualties, 511 men, 91 dead, 313 wounded. But the mountain falls and the impossible becomes history. Next objective, Monte Majo, January 1944. Even more difficult than La Defensa because German machine gun emplacements are arranged in layers on the steep slopes, positioned so that any assault will be met with withering fire from multiple positions, and any noise will alert the entire defense. Lieutenant Colonel Gilday looks at the problem, looks at Tommy Prince, and gives him an order that seems impossible even by Devil's Brigade standards. January 8th, 1944. Night falls on Monte Majo, and Tommy leads a small patrol partway up the slopes, leaves his men positioned as support, then goes alone into the darkness. Captain Mark Radcliffe watches him disappear and will later record what he saw. Tommy Prince moved just like a shadow, which is the only description that makes sense, because no one sees him go, no one hears him move, no one knows what he does until it is already done. Tommy approaches the German positions one by one, carrying moccasins in his pack, because army boots make noise that gets men eliminated. He changes footwear and moves in absolute silence, entering the first machine gun bunker where the Germans inside die before they can make a sound. Knife work. Clean. Quiet. No alarm raised. He moves to the next position, then the next, then the next, working his way up the slopes and eliminating every gun pit on the assault route without a single shot fired, without a single shout of warning. By dawn, the gun positions are silent and the force advances without taking fire, reaching the summit to find the German bunkers empty except for bodies. The soldiers know who did this, and they call it a beautiful job, which seems inadequate for describing what one man accomplished in darkness against fortified positions that were supposed to be death traps. The German division facing the Devil's Brigade begins pulling back, retreating 2.5 miles away from direct contact because they are shaken by stories spreading through their ranks. Stories of a ghost in their lines, a devil who moves without sound, who eliminates without warning. They start calling the entire force by these names, Schwarzer Teufel, Black Devils, and they leave calling cards on dead German soldiers that read, Das dicke Ende kommt noch. The worst is yet to come. Tommy develops his psychological warfare tactics with methodical precision. At night, he wears moccasins and sneaks past German security guards, entering enemy sleeping locations where sometimes he leaves messages or warnings. Sometimes he steals boots right off their feet while they sleep, and sometimes he uses his knife. The Germans wake to find a soldier dead beside them, throat cut, with no one having heard anything during the night. The psychological effect is devastating and spreads through German ranks like infection. One German soldier whispers, Schwarzer Teufel, Black Devil, as his throat is being cut, and Tommy hears the fear in that whisper before the man dies. February 5th, 1944. The force moves to Anzio on Italy's west coast, where the Allied beachhead is contained and under constant German attack from all sides. The 1st Special Service Force holds miles of perimeter against a full German division, 1,200 men standing against thousands, and Lieutenant Colonel Gilday sends Tommy forward with an impossible mission: locate German assembly points and artillery positions in territory completely controlled by the enemy. Tommy finds an abandoned farmhouse sitting 200 meters from enemy artillery positions. He runs 1,400 meters of telephone wire from Allied lines to the house, sets up an observation post, and begins reporting precise coordinates. The Allies open fire on the targets Tommy identifies, and an artillery duel erupts with shells falling across the battlefield. One round cuts Tommy's telephone wire and he is suddenly cut off, isolated 200 meters from German artillery, with no way to communicate and no way to call for help. Tommy finds civilian clothes in the farmhouse, overalls, a hat, a hoe, and he puts them on and walks outside into the open in full view of German soldiers. He pretends to be an Italian farmer, weeding crops, working his way methodically along the wire, looking for the break. When he finds it, he kneels down, pretending to tie his shoelaces while his hands quickly rejoin the severed wires. Then he stands and shakes his fist at the Germans, then shakes his fist at the Allied lines, playing the role of an angry Italian farmer, disgusted with both sides bringing war to his land. The Germans watch him and don't believe the performance completely. They stop shelling the farmhouse. Tommy goes back inside and continues reporting coordinates for 24 consecutive hours, spending 3 days total behind enemy lines. 4 German batteries are destroyed because of his intelligence, and Lieutenant Colonel Gilday recommends him for the military medal with a citation that reads, "Sergeant Prince's courage and utter disregard for personal safety were an inspiration to his fellows and a marked credit to his unit." Tommy receives the military medal, but the Montemajo mission receives no individual award because the operation remains classified, the special stealth techniques too valuable to reveal in a public citation where they might compromise future operations. So his single-handed neutralization of an entire defensive line remains secret, known only to the men who were there and who understand what he saved them from. June 4th, 1944. The Devil's Brigade leads American forces into Rome, and Tommy is among the first Allied soldiers to enter the Italian capital in the liberation that marks a turning point in the Italian campaign. August 15, 1944, southern France, Operation Dragoon. The force assaults the Hyeres Islands and goes ashore at Silver Bell on the French Riviera, then pushes eastward toward the Franco-Italian border through territory still heavily defended by German forces determined to slow the Allied advance. September 1st, 1944, Tommy and one private are sent forward on a reconnaissance mission to scout German positions near L'Escarène, to find the enemy reserve battalion encampment, to locate gun emplacements, and to report back with intelligence that will save Allied lives. They trek 24 kilometers behind German lines through mountainous terrain, and Tommy conducts detailed observation of a German reserve battalion at close quarters using natural foliage as cover, avoiding detection through skills learned in the Manitoba bush decades ago. On the return journey, they encounter a battle in progress, a German platoon surrounding a squad of French partisans who are outnumbered 3-1, maybe 4-1, facing annihilation within minutes. Tommy and the private open fire with expert precision, sniping from behind the German position, eliminating approximately 12 Germans and wounding many others. The Germans withdraw in confusion and demoralization, unable to understand where the devastating fire is coming from or how many soldiers are attacking them. The French partisan leader approaches cautiously and asks where Tommy's company is located. Tommy points to himself, points to the private, and says, "Here," which is all the explanation available. The French commander cannot believe it because he thought there were 50 men in the woods. The fire was that accurate, that sustained, that professionally executed from multiple angles. Tommy and the private continue walking back to Allied lines, covering 70 kilometers total over 72 hours without food, without water, without sleep. Tommy reports the German encampment location with detailed intelligence, then leads the force back to the position in an assault that captures approximately 1,000 German soldiers. The Silver Star citation reads, "So accurate was the report rendered by the patrol that Sergeant Prince's regiment moved forward on the 5th of September 1944, occupied new heights and successfully wiped out the enemy bivouac area. The keen sense of responsibility and devotion to duty displayed by Sergeant Prince is in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflects great credit upon himself and the armed forces of the Allied nations." December 1944. The Devil's Brigade is disbanded after sustaining too many casualties to continue operations. Members are dispersed to their respective national forces, but the unit's legacy is already secure. In their short existence, they accounted for 12,000 German casualties and 7,000 prisoners of war captured, feared across the entire Italian and French theatres. Tommy returns to England. February 12, 1945. Buckingham Palace. King George VI presents him with the military medal and speaks with him for several minutes about his bravery. Then, on behalf of the President of the United States, presents Tommy with the Silver Star. Tommy is one of 59 Canadians awarded the Silver Star during World War II, one of only 3 to receive both the military medal and the Silver Star, a distinction shared with almost no one. He also receives the 1939 to 1945 Star, the Italy Star, the France and Germany Star, the Defence Medal, the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal with clasp, and the War Medal 1939 to 1945. 9 medals for World War II service, making him the most decorated Indigenous soldier in Canadian history. June 15, 1945. Tommy is honourably discharged and returns to Canada, to the Broken Head Reserve, to a country that does not allow him to vote because he is Indigenous and federal voting rights for Indigenous peoples will not come until 1959, 14 years away. His veteran benefits are unequal, systematically less than white soldiers receive. This is written policy, documented discrimination built into the system. Tommy uses Department of Veterans Affairs funding to start a cleaning business in Winnipeg, and it succeeds initially with local contracts and employed staff, achieving financial stability that seems like the beginning of the life he earned through service. Then the contracts stop renewing and the business collapses. Tommy attributes it to racism and discrimination. No one will hire an Indian-owned company, not in 1940s Manitoba, not when there are white-owned alternatives available. December 1946. Tommy is elected chairman of the Manitoba Indian Association, and he consults with Indigenous communities across the province, because the federal government is revising the Indian Act, and this seems like an opportunity for real change. Tommy develops sound, well-researched suggestions based on conversations with people who live under the Act's restrictions, and he testifies before parliamentary committees, presenting detailed proposals for reform. The government ignores him completely, ignores all the suggestions. The Indian Act revisions proceed without meaningful Indigenous input, and Tommy is left frustrated and angry because he is the most decorated Indigenous soldier in Canadian history, and Canada will not listen to him about basic rights. He works lumber camps and concrete factories, manual labour again, like before the war, as if nothing he did mattered, as if the medals mean nothing when translated into civilian life. August 1950. Korea. War begins. and Tommy volunteers immediately at age 34. "I owed something to my friends who died," he explains, which is the statement of a man who survived when others did not, and who carries that survival like debt. He is reinstated as sergeant and joins the 2nd Battalion Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, the 1st Canadian Battalion to arrive in the war zone. February 1951. Tommy leads an 8-man night snatch patrol into an enemy camp using the same stealth tactics he perfected in Italy, moving in silence under cover of darkness. They return before dawn with 2 captured Chinese heavy machine guns and 0 casualties, a textbook special operations mission executed with precision. April 24th through 25, 1951. Battle of Cap Yong, Hill 677. The Patricias hold defensive positions so a South Korean division can withdraw while Chinese and North Korean forces attack in overwhelming numbers. The battalion is surrounded and ammunition and rations can only arrive by air, but they hold for 2 days despite 10 men dying and 23 wounded. The enemy withdraws. The 2nd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, receives the United States Presidential Unit Citation, the first Canadian unit ever awarded this honor, and Tommy is with them, fighting and leading and surviving another impossible battle. But the arthritis in his knees worsens from old battle wounds and years of harsh conditions catching up with accumulated damage. He is sent home and assigned to training duties, which he accepts with loud and frequent complaints because he wants to return to combat, demands it, cannot accept being sidelined while there is still fighting to be done. October 1952. His wish is granted with assignment to 3rd Battalion Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry back to Korea. But battle exhaustion overwhelms him. What is now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder had no name in 1952, no treatment, just men who cannot function anymore, and Tommy becomes one of them. Nightmares, emotional detachment, the memories that never stop. He is wounded in November 1952 and hospitalized. September 1954. Tommy is honorably discharged on medical grounds, chronic knee arthritis and battle exhaustion. He receives the Canadian Career Medal and the United Nations Service Medal. Posthumously, he will receive the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal for Korea, created in 1991. 11 medals total across 2 wars. He returns to Winnipeg, to a country that still does not fully recognize what he sacrificed. He cannot vote until 1959. His arthritis limits his mobility and his ability to work. His PTSD goes untreated and undiagnosed because the medical establishment does not understand what war does to men who survive it. He begins drinking heavily, and the alcohol becomes a coping mechanism, the only one available to a man with invisible wounds and no access to care. His life deteriorates with brutal efficiency. His marriage ends, estrangement from family. He cannot hold jobs because of the chronic pain and the emotional trauma and the discrimination that compounds everything. He falls into poverty, then into homelessness. He sells his medals one by one to pay for food, for shelter, for survival. Each sale a small death of its own. 1955. One moment of clarity, one moment of being who he was. Tommy sees a man drowning at the Alexander Docks in Winnipeg, and he leaps into the water without hesitation, saves the man, then disappears back into poverty and anonymity. The years pass, and Tommy Prince becomes invisible, the most decorated Indigenous soldier in Canadian history, the man Germans feared as a ghost, the man who saved hundreds of Allied lives living in a Salvation Army shelter, unknown and unrecognized by the country he served. 1968, Hollywood releases The Devil's Brigade, a major film starring William Holden and Cliff Robertson. Big-budget production telling the story of the 1st Special Service Force, their training, their missions in Italy, the Germans calling them Black Devils, all of it dramatized for the screen. Tommy Prince is not in the film, not mentioned, not represented. The most decorated member of the entire brigade, the man who single-handedly neutralized the Monte Maggio defenses, the ghost who terrified German divisions. He is erased from the story completely. One character in the film has the nickname Chief, perhaps a weak reference, perhaps not. Tommy watches the film and says nothing because what is there to say? November 25th, 1977, Deer Lodge Hospital. Tommy Prince dies at age 62, his body destroyed by arthritis, chronic alcoholism, and untreated PTSD. His last years were spent in poverty and homelessness, with no family present at the end. Few people aware of who he was or what he did. The funeral changes everything, but too late. Manitoba's Lieutenant Governor attends. Consuls from France, Italy, and the United States. Representatives from the Canadian government. Over 500 people arrive to honor what they ignored while he lived. A delegation of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry serves as pallbearers, and they drape a Canadian flag over his coffin with military precision. As the casket is lowered into the ground at Brookside Cemetery, men from the Broken Head Ojibwe Nation chant the death of a warrior song, and the sound carries across the cemetery, ancient and mournful, honoring what Canada refused to honor while he breathed. The Winnipeg Free Press runs the headline, "Pauper's Burial for War Hero," and those 4 words are an indictment more powerful than any editorial, a summary of everything wrong with how Canada treats its Indigenous warriors. The recognition continues, all posthumous, all after Tommy cannot know it happened. November 11th, 1989, a monument is erected in Kildonan Park, Winnipeg, not far from where his great-great-grandfather Pegis has his own monument. They are together now in stone and memory. 2000. Tommy's medals appear at an auction in London, Ontario, the ones he sold to survive. His nephew Jim Bear raises money and purchases them for $75,000, an extraordinary price that speaks to their value and the tragedy of their sale. The medals are given to the family and placed on permanent display at the Manitoba Museum in 2001. Buildings are named after him. The Tommy Prince Drill Hall in Wainwright, Alberta, barracks at Canadian Forces Base Petawawa, roads and streets and schools across Canada. The Sergeant Tommy Prince Army Training Initiative becomes a government program for Indigenous recruiting. Assembly of First Nations scholarships are established in his name. October 17, 2022. Canada Post releases a commemorative stamp showing Tommy Prince in his Korean War uniform with the Northern Lights in the background. Beautiful, meaningless to a man who died homeless 45 years earlier. His tombstone at Brookside Cemetery lists 2 of his 11 medals, the Military Medal and the Silver Star. Space does not allow for all of them. The stone does not mention Monte Maggio or the farmer disguise at Anzio or the 70 kilometers walked without food or water, or the French partisans saved from annihilation, or the Germans who called him ghost and devil. and shadow. It does not need to mention these things because the people who need to know. But most Canadians do not know and have never heard of Tommy Prince, Canada's most decorated Indigenous soldier, the most decorated member of the Devil's Brigade, the man Germans feared more than entire battalions. He is not taught in schools, not part of the national narrative, not remembered by the country he served. Jim Bear, Tommy's nephew, speaks to reporters in 2020 and remembers his uncle as a visionary, a man who wanted to abolish the Indian Act, who fought for Indigenous rights and equality and respect. "We're still trying to change it," Jim Bear says, talking about the Indian Act, talking about inequality, talking about a fight Tommy began 75 years ago that remains unfinished. "All my life," Tommy said once, "I had wanted to do something to help my people recover their good name. I wanted to show they were as good as any white man." He showed it in Italy and France and Korea. 11 medals across 2 wars, missions that saved hundreds of lives, courage that inspired entire units, service that earned recognition from 5 nations. Canada's response was systematic betrayal. You cannot vote, your benefits are less, your business will fail, your advocacy will be ignored, your service will be forgotten, you will die homeless, you will be buried in poverty, and we will remember you only after you are gone, only when it costs us nothing. Thomas George Prince, born in a canvas tent, died in a hospital, buried with full honours he never received while living. Canada's most decorated Indigenous soldier, the ghost the Germans feared, the devil who moved like a shadow, the man who did everything his country asked and received nothing in return except systematic discrimination and ultimate abandonment. Perhaps Canada's greatest soldier, certainly its most betrayed. The monument stands in Kildonan Park. The medals rest in the Manitoba Museum. The stamp exists. The buildings carry his name. All of it posthumous. All of it too late. All of it the performance of guilt wearing the mask of honor. A country trying to feel better about what it did by building memorials instead of providing respect when it mattered. 500 people attended his funeral in 1977, with governments sending representatives and flags being lowered, and speeches being given. The warrior was honored, finally. 45 years later, the recognition continues with monuments and scholarships and programs, his name preserved in stone and paper and policy. But ask any Canadian under 40 who Tommy Prince was, and most will not know. Ask them who the most decorated Indigenous soldier in Canadian history was, and you will receive silence. Ask them about the Devil's Brigade, and maybe they have heard of the 1968 film, maybe not. The recognition is not real in any meaningful sense. It is performative, the appearance of honor without the substance. Guilt attempting to purchase absolution through posthumous awards and named buildings. It is everything except the one thing that mattered when he was alive: respect. Tommy Prince died homeless at age 62. Canada let it happen, watched it happen, did nothing, then built monuments to apologize to the dead because apologizing to the living required actual change. The monuments stand and the story remains largely untold. Somewhere in the Italian mountains, in the French countryside, in the Korean hills, the ghosts of men who fought beside Tommy Prince must wonder why Canada forgets, why the soldier who saved so many lives could not save his own, why the country he served let him die in a Salvation Army shelter. There is no good answer, just the truth without decoration. Tommy Prince gave everything to Canada, and Canada gave him nothing in return except broken promises and systematic neglect. Remember his name. Say it out loud. Tommy Prince, Sergeant, Devil's Brigade, Canada's most decorated Indigenous soldier, the ghost, the devil, the shadow, the man who died homeless because his country forgot him while he still breathed. That is the story Canada does not tell. That is the recognition gap. That is what was done to perhaps Canada's greatest soldier. 11 medals, 2 wars, 5 nations honoring him at his funeral, and in his last years, not enough money for food, not enough dignity for shelter, not enough recognition to matter. Canada owes Tommy Prince more than monuments and stamps and named buildings. Canada owes his memory the truth. He was betrayed by the country he served, by the system he fought to change, by the people who forgot him. The least we can do now is remember. The least we can do is tell his story. The least we can do is acknowledge what was done, what was not done, what should have been done. Tommy Prince, born October 25, 1915, died November 25, 1977, 62 years, 2 wars, 11 medals, homeless at the end, Canada's greatest soldier and Canada's deepest shame. His grave sits in Brookside Cemetery in the military section with a simple white headstone that reads, Sergeant Thomas G. Prince MM 1915 to 1977, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, Military Medal, Silver Star. 2 medals listed, 9 unlisted, because the stone cannot hold the full measure of what he did, and neither can any monument, neither can any stamp, neither can any recognition given after death. The only measure that matters is what Canada did while he lived. Canada watched him fall, watched him struggle, watched him die. That is the truth. That is the story. That is what happened to Canada's most decorated Indigenous soldier, to the ghost the Germans feared, to the man who saved hundreds of lives. He died homeless, in poverty, forgotten by everyone except the few who knew him and the memories that haunted him. Canada remembers now. Too late. Always too late. Remember Tommy Prince, not because of the monuments, not because of the stamps, not because Canada says to remember. Remember him because his story demands it, because his service earned it, because his betrayal requires witnesses. Remember him because he was a warrior, and warriors deserve more than posthumous recognition. They deserve respect while they live. Tommy Prince never received it. That is Canada's failure. That is the recognition gap. That is the story that needs to be told.